The days passed slowly, but the silence in Jeroen's life was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was a grey afternoon, typical of Amsterdam, and he was in the kitchen washing up after lunch. When he opened the door, he was met by a well-dressed young man with a friendly expression, holding a small envelope. "Are you Jeroen?" the man asked, offering a polite smile. "Yes, that's me," Jeroen replied, puzzled. "Can I help you?" "My name is Lars," the visitor said, extending a firm handshake. "I'm Mrs. Hendrika's grandson. I believe you remember her." Jeroen blinked, surprised. He hadn't expected to hear the elderly woman's name again, let alone meet one of her relatives. "Oh, of course. Is she doing well?" Lars nodded, though his tone carried a seriousness. "Yes, thanks to you. My grandmother made it to her doctor's appointment that day. The doctor said that if she'd been delayed, her treatment might have become much more complicated." Before Jeroen could respond, Lars pulled the envelope from his pocket and handed it to him. "My mother wrote this for you. She was very moved when she heard what you did. So was I. I couldn't pass up the chance to thank you personally." Jeroen accepted the envelope carefully, feeling the symbolic weight of the gesture. He invited Lars inside, but the young man declined politely. "I've got other commitments today," he explained, "but I hope we can talk again soon." As Lars left, Jeroen opened the envelope. Inside, he found a handwritten letter on delicate paper. He read each word attentively. Asterisk, "Dear Jeroen. My son told me about what you did for my mother, Hendrika. Words cannot fully express my gratitude. My mother suffers from Alzheimer's and sometimes struggles with even the simplest tasks. The day you helped her was one of her most difficult, and your act of kindness made all the difference. You showed compassion and empathy, qualities that are not always appreciated in today's world. I want you to know that actions like yours are rare and precious. People like you make society a better place. With eternal gratitude. Annelies." Asterisk. Jeroen finished the letter with a lump in his throat. He had never expected that such a simple act would have such a profound impact. For days, he had doubted his decision and endured its consequences. But now, holding that piece of paper, he felt as though there might be a greater purpose behind everything he had been through. When Marriage and San came home, Jeroen shared Lars's visit and showed them the letter. Marriage smiled with pride. "I always knew your kindness would come back to you. This is proof." San, ever enthusiastic, exclaimed, "See? You're not just a nice guy. You're a guy who makes a difference." Although the letter warmed his heart, Jeroen remained uncertain about the future. The Hendrika family's gratitude was comforting, but it didn't solve his financial challenges or dispel the lingering doubts that haunted him. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lars's visit wasn't a coincidence. Something was beginning to change. Later that evening, as he stared out at the cloudy night sky from his bedroom window, Jeroen felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe San was right. Maybe there really was a path for him, something that aligned his actions with his values. What Jeroen didn't yet realize was that the impact of his kind act was only just starting to unfold. A few weeks after the incident with the woman and her son, something unexpected began to unfold. Jeroen's story had grown marked, and his past at the petrol station started circulating on community forums and social media. Someone who had been in the store that day wrote a heartfelt account of the event, highlighting the impact of Jeroen's actions. The post quickly gained traction, attracting hundreds of comments and shares. Jeroen was caught off guard when Lars showed him the post. "Looks like you're inspiring more people than you thought," Lars said with a smile. "This is exactly the kind of impact we want to have." The viral story not only brought recognition to Jeroen but also spotlighted Groenmarkt as a company that valued ethics and humanity in its leadership. Customers began visiting the store specifically to meet the manager who valued people over policies. Some even shared their own stories of how small acts of kindness had changed their lives. For Jeroen, the greatest impact was personal. He realized his job was no longer just about earning a living. He was creating an environment where humanity was celebrated and encouraged. His team began to emulate his approach, going above and beyond to assist customers and support one another. One day, as he walked through the store, Jeroen saw Ingrid, the employee who had initially raised concerns about policies, helping an elderly customer organize their shopping bags. When he greeted her, she smiled and said, "I learned it from you, boss." Small gestures can make a big difference. That evening, lying in bed, Jeroen reflected on his journey. He had started at the petrol station with a narrow view of what he could achieve, and one simple decision had changed everything. Despite the unfairness of his dismissal, he had discovered a greater purpose. He realized that acts of kindness aren't isolated gestures, they are seeds that grow and impact entire communities. Doing what's right, even when faced with consequences, is an investment in the future. As Jeroen closed his eyes that night, he knew he had found more than a job. He had found a calling. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other stories that touch the heart. The days following Jeroen's dismissal were marked by a mix of uncertainty and restlessness. The routine he had built over the years at the petrol station had vanished, leaving behind a void he didn't know how to fill. Time, once scarce, now stretched endlessly, turning every hour into an eternity. Mornings were spent updating his CV, browsing job websites, and hunting for something that could bring financial stability. Yet, with each unanswered email and every cancelled interview, his frustration grew. Doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps he'd made a mistake in helping Mrs. Hendricka. Despite his mother and sister's unwavering reassurance, his confidence eroded under the weight of his second-guessing. The whispers in the neighborhood didn't help either. Every time he ventured out to the bakery or the market, he felt the stares and heard the murmurs. "Got fired for a good deed," a neighbor remarked once. Though the comment wasn't malicious, Jeroen felt exposed, as if his life had become public property. At home, Marij and San did everything they could to lift his spirits. Over dinner, Marij often recounted stories of resilience from their family's past. "Did you know your grandfather lost his job as a carpenter and ended up opening his own workshop? He used to say that sometimes life pushes us where we need to be," she said one evening, her smile gentle but encouraging. San took a more practical approach. She began leaving flyers and links to free courses on Jeroen's desk. "Maybe it's time to learn something new," she suggested brightly. "You've got time now, so why not give it a shot?" But Jeroen was trapped in a cycle of self-doubt. The sting of rejection weighed heavier than his family's encouraging words. He felt immobilized by his recent failure, unable to see the opportunities San mentioned as anything but distant mirages. One afternoon, while walking along a nearby canal, Jeroen spotted a group of children playing by the water's edge. They laughed and ran, blissfully unaware of the burdens of adulthood. For a moment, he paused, watching them and letting himself forget his troubles. Then, suddenly, one of the children, caught up in the game, nearly stumbled into the canal. Acting on instinct, Jeroen lunged forward and caught the boy by the arm just in time. "Thanks, mister," the boy shouted, dashing back to his friends. Jeroen stood there for a while, watching the children play, feeling a faint spark of purpose reignite within him. He realized that, despite his turmoil, he still had the ability to help, to make a difference. It was a simple thought, yet profoundly meaningful. Back at the apartment, he shared the story over dinner. Marij smiled warmly as she ladled more soup into their bowls. "That's what I've been telling you, Jeroen. Kindness doesn't depend on your circumstances. It's in you, and no one can take that away." Although his mother's words provided comfort, Jeroen knew he needed more than emotional support. He needed a plan, something concrete to rebuild his confidence and give him direction. That's when San suggested something new. "Maybe you should look for jobs that value what you did for Mrs. Hendricka," she said thoughtfully. "Places that need people with compassion and ethics." "And where would that be?" Jeroen asked, skepticism creeping into his tone. "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out together," she replied, her determined smile unwavering. Jeroen wasn't sure if the idea was realistic, but it sparked a flicker of hope. Perhaps there was a place for him, a role where his choices were seen as strengths rather than weaknesses. He just needed to find it. Petrol station attendant dismissed after helping elderly woman. Days later someone visits his home. The bell on the petrol station door chimed with its familiar jingle as an elderly lady walked in, clutching a small handbag to her chest. Jeroen, who was busy tidying up the snack shelves, glanced up and offered a polite smile. The woman looked distressed. Her eyes darted around the room, and her hands trembled slightly. "I'm sorry to trouble you," she began, her voice frail and uncertain. "I need help. I've forgotten my wallet at home and I have an important doctor's appointment." Jeroen immediately noticed her unease. Dressed in a coat that seemed far too large for her, the lady exuded a vulnerability that tugged at his heart. "No problem, madam," he replied gently. "How much petrol do you need?" She hesitated before murmuring, "Just enough to get me to the city center." Jeroen was well aware of the station's strict policies. He had seen colleagues reprimanded for the smallest infractions. Even so, there was something about this situation that he simply couldn't ignore. He knew how tough the city could be for vulnerable people, especially someone like her. "Leave it to me," Jeroen said, stepping out from behind the counter. He walked over to the petrol pump and began filling the tank of the woman's small car. With each liter, a mix of empathy and worry churned within him. He knew there could be repercussions, but his conscience wouldn't let him act otherwise. When he finished, the woman's eyes filled with emotion. "I promise I'll come back to pay," she said, her voice trembling as if she might cry. "I'll never forget what you've done for me." Jeroen simply nodded, a calm smile on his face. "Just take care of yourself and get to your appointment safely." As the woman's car disappeared down the road, Jeroen's smile faded, replaced by a tense expression. He knew the manager, Mr. De Vries, was likely in the office, keeping an eye on the security cameras. Sure enough, moments later, the office door creaked open, and the man emerged with a stern look. "Jeroen, could I have a word with you?" De Vries's voice was firm, almost icy. In the cramped office, the walls seemed to close in on Jeroen as the manager recounted the incident. "You're well aware that violating the station's financial policies is unacceptable. It doesn't matter what the reason is. This is a business, not a charity." "But she needed help, Mr. De Vries." "It was an emergency," Jeroen protested, trying to keep his composure. De Vries shook his head, unmoved. "It's not about the lady, Jeroen. It's about the principle. We can't make exceptions." "I'm sorry, but you're dismissed." Jeroen felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. The injustice of the moment burned in his chest, but he knew arguing would be futile. With one last glance at the office he had come to know so well, he removed his badge, handed it to the manager, and walked out through the main door. On his way home, the biting cold of Amsterdam felt sharper than ever. The scene of Mrs. Hendrika's grateful thanks replayed in his mind, intertwined with De Vries's harsh words. He felt the bitterness of having done the right thing, only to be punished for it. What Jeroen didn't know was that this simple act of kindness would change his life forever. The familiar chime of the shop's door carried a different weight for Jeroen now. As the manager of the new grown-marked store, he was settling into a rhythm that was both challenging and rewarding. Yet, that morning, a peculiar tension hung in the air. Everything seemed to be running smoothly until a customer entered, accompanied by a boy of about 10. The woman, visibly tired, pushed an empty trolley, her eyes scanning the shelves with hesitation. Jeroen noticed her expression while assisting another customer, and something inside him stirred, a faint but unmistakable sense of déjà vu. After a few minutes, the woman approached the counter with only a loaf of bread and a small tin of soup. "Excuse me," she said quietly, avoiding eye contact. "I'm in a bit of a situation. I need these items, but I've forgotten my wallet at home. Could I come back later to pay?" Her words brought back an instant flood of memories for Jeroen. The scene mirrored his experience at the petrol station so vividly that, for a moment, he felt transported back to that day. But this time, he was in charge. He glanced at the woman and then at the boy, who clung to her arm, visibly uneasy. Jeroen knew what the store's policy stated: every transaction had to be properly logged. But he also knew the profound impact a small act of kindness could have. "Don't worry," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "Take the items. I'll make a note here, and you can sort it out later." The woman's eyes widened in surprise and relief. "Thank you so much," she murmured, carefully picking up the products. As she left the store without looking back, Jeroen noticed the boy giving him a subtle wave before they disappeared through the door. As Jeroen returned to work, one of the employees, Ingrid, approached him. "You know that goes against policy," she said in a neutral tone. "But I think you did the right thing." "I understand what you mean," Jeroen replied, trying to sound confident. "But I think our actions need to reflect the kind of community we want to build here." The incident seemed settled until the end of the day when Lars arrived at the store for a routine visit. Though his tone was casual as always, his presence carried a natural authority. Jeroen knew he'd have to address what had happened. "Lars, can I talk to you about something that happened today?" Jeroen asked as the two sat in the store's office. After Jeroen recounted the story, Lars remained silent for a few moments, studying his expression. Finally, he spoke. "You made a tough decision, Jeroen. And that's exactly what I expected from you." Jeroen exhaled, relieved. "So, you don't think I acted wrongly?" "On the contrary," Lars said, a faint smile crossing his face. "Policies are important, but they should never outweigh people. I brought you into this position because I knew you had the judgment to do what's right, even when it's not easy." Lars's response confirmed something Jeroen had suspected: this wasn't just a job. It was a role where his values and decisions were not only acknowledged but appreciated. The next day, the same woman returned to the store, this time with her wallet in hand. She paid for the items and insisted on thanking Jeroen personally. "You have no idea what this meant to me," she said. "It's been an incredibly tough week, and your kindness gave me hope." As she left, Jeroen felt something shift within him. He realized that his role was more than selling products or meeting targets. He was helping to foster a culture of compassion and respect. For the first time in a long while, Jeroen felt a profound sense of belonging. He knew now, without a doubt, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The apartment door closed with a soft click, yet the sound seemed deafening in the silence that filled the room. Jeroen dropped his backpack to the floor with a heavy sigh, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on his shoulders. The small apartment he shared with his mother, Marijke, and his younger sister, San, was cozy but now felt oppressively tight, mirroring his state of mind. "You're home early," Marijke said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands. She was a woman with a gentle expression and eyes that carried the wisdom of years. Seeing her son's defeated look, she set the towel aside and approached him. "What happened, Jeroen?" Jeroen hesitated, avoiding her gaze. "I was fired, Mum." The word sounded more final than he expected, and he had to swallow the lump forming in his throat. "Fired? But why?" Marijke's concern was evident in her voice, though it held no trace of judgment. Taking a deep breath, Jeroen explained everything: the situation with Mrs. Hendricka, the Petrol, and the confrontation with Mr. de Vries. Marijke listened in silence, her attention unwavering. San, who had been studying in her room, emerged into the living room, drawn by the conversation. "You just did what you thought was right," Marijke finally said, her voice unexpectedly firm. "I'm proud of you, Jeroen. No matter what Mr. de Vries or anyone else says, integrity will always matter more than blindly following rules." San, a young woman in her early 20s with the energy and determination of youth, nodded vigorously in agreement. "She's right. You couldn't just ignore her situation. Who knows what might have happened if she hadn't made it to her doctor's appointment." She paused, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe this is a sign for you to rethink what you really want to do." "Rethink what?" Jeroen asked, frustration creeping into his tone. "I need a job, San. I can't just sit around waiting for something to fall into my lap." "I know," she replied calmly but firmly. "But maybe this is the time to reflect on what kind of work fits who you are. Something that aligns with your values." Her words lingered in Jeroen's mind as he retreated to the small bedroom he shared with stacks of boxes and a narrow bed. Sitting on the edge of the mattress, he stared at his hands, the same hands that had helped Mrs. Hendricka and were now empty. San was right, but at that moment, he had no idea where to start looking for something new. Everything seemed distant, out of reach. The next morning, Jeroen left for a walk around the neighborhood. The quiet residential streets of Amsterdam, lined with trees and parked bicycles, were a reminder of the simplicity of community life. He exchanged greetings with a few neighbors along the way but avoided lengthy conversations. He could feel the curious glances, the subtle interest that always arose when something unusual happened. One neighbor, Mr. Hoekstra, an elderly man who tended diligently to his garden, called out, "I heard what happened, young man. It was noble, what you did. Don't let it get you down." Though the words were well-meaning, Jeroen felt a strange discomfort hearing his act of kindness brought up by others. He hadn't acted for recognition, but now it seemed the entire neighborhood knew. When he returned home, he found Marij in the kitchen preparing soup. The familiar aroma brought a small measure of comfort. "Don't worry about what people say, Jeroen," she said, stirring the pot. "These things have a way of working themselves out. And remember, we're not in this alone." Jeroen knew his mother was right. But the uncertainty of the future continued to loom like a heavy cloud, bringing a sense of urgency he wasn't yet sure how to address. The next morning, Jeroen was finishing his coffee when another knock came at the door. For a moment, he thought Lars had returned. Straightening his wrinkled t-shirt, he opened the door to find Lars again, this time with an even more determined expression. "Good morning, Jeroen," Lars said, stepping in without hesitation after a welcoming nod. "I've been thinking a lot about your story since yesterday, and I want to have a serious conversation." Jeroen gestured toward the kitchen table, intrigued. Lars pulled a slim folder from under his arm and placed it on the table. "I'm the operations director of a sustainable supermarket chain called Groenmarkt," Lars began, his professional tone commanding attention. "We're looking for leaders who can not only manage operations but also create an environment that prioritizes people, both customers and employees." Jeroen leaned forward, unsure how this conversation involved him. "When I heard what you did for my grandmother," Lars continued, "I was struck by your empathy. It wasn't just a good deed, it was a difficult decision made for the sake of someone else. That's the kind of leadership we're seeking." Jeroen's mind raced. He had expected nothing more than gratitude for helping Mrs. Hendricke, but now Lars was talking about a job opportunity. Trying to mask his skepticism, Jeroen listened intently, though Lars seemed to pick up on his hesitation. "Look, I know this might feel like a big leap," Lars said, opening the folder and sliding a sheet of paper toward Jeroen. "Here's a description of the role. You'd start as the manager of one of our expanding stores. I want you to bring your vision and values to transform the space." Jeroen stared at the paper, trying to process everything. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. "You want me to manage a store?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But I've never done anything like that before." "That's exactly why I trust you," Lars replied with a faint smile. "The best leaders are those who understand the value of human choices, not just company policies. We'll train you. You've got the instinct, the rest is just learning." Jeroen felt a mix of excitement and doubt. "What if I'm not good enough?" he murmured. Lars met his gaze. "You've already proven you're good enough. The rest is having the courage to try." Jeroen spent the afternoon discussing details with Lars, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He accepted the offer, albeit with some trepidation. The idea of stepping into such an unfamiliar role was daunting, but the chance to make a difference in a place that aligned with his values was too compelling to pass up. When Lars left, Jeroen sat down with Marij and Sand to share the news. His mother's face lit up with pride, her eyes glistening. "This is the kind of change you needed," she said. "Now it's your turn to show the world what you're capable of." Sand, ever the pragmatist, quipped, "You'll need some proper clothes," pointing to Jeroen's faded t-shirt. "And maybe learn to talk like a manager. No slang, okay?" The days that followed were filled with preparation. Lars arranged a short training program and introduced Jeroen to the team at the new store. Jeroen was impressed by the welcoming atmosphere and the focus on sustainability and community, values that resonated deeply with him. On his first official day, Jeroen felt both nervous and motivated. As he walked through the store's doors, the team greeted him warmly. Standing there, he realized that he had a lot to learn, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be.